It's such a pleasure to have you here for the very first release of Primedia Broadcasting's Audioscope. I am quite nervous because I can see that we've got both Gordon Miller and Chris Buerter in the audience, so we're expecting a lot of tricky questions. But a great attendance. Some people still logging on, but great to see everybody here. Carol Bassett, happy birthday for last week. Hope it was a good one. I can see Howard West from PhD, and I think we're just about at 200 people coming in. So for the people I haven't met before on this call, I'm Deborah Schepers. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Primedia Broadcasting, and joining me from my team is Melissa McNally, Consultant Specialist for Research. Hello, Mel.
Hi, Deb. Hi, everybody.
Great to have you with us, Mel. And you've done a series of webinars over the past few months. I think you are our resident lockdown webinar star. It's like second nature to you now. But this is without question the most exciting release, and we are really pleased to be sharing this data today. What we're talking about today is the first wave of Primedia Broadcasting's Audioscope. We kicked off the study in October last year, and we've been continuously tracking and monitoring audio consumption and performance across the South African audio landscape. But let's first check in with how everyone on this webinar is with a quick poll. If I can ask technical to pull up the poll, please. So we want to understand what data sets you're using right now to get your head around radio performance in the absence of RAMs. We all know that the last RAMs release was 2 March last year. Some very exciting stuff on the horizon. But in the meantime, have you been fine and just waiting for the new currency? Have you been using no data and are desperate for data? Have you been using TGI, Brand Map, Brand Atlas, or other? It would be great to get your feedback in a sense. And we'll share the poll results just now. While we wait for the poll results, I would like you to introduce you. I've got a little bit of trepidation as I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to introduce you to Primedia Broadcasting's resident firecracker, Carl Wastie. Hello, Carl.
Hello, I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. I wish I had a girl who looked good, I would call her. Wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6-form parlor.
I just wanted to make sure that you know that I just wanted to say hi. That's all. Hello there to everybody. Thank you, Deborah. Am I a firecracker?
Yeah, Carl, that's one word. That's the first word. There are more words.
Well, I just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you very much for that warm introduction, though. When it comes to firecracker, I suppose in a lot of ways, the firecracker label followed me because I like making things happen on radio. I work on KFM 94.5. I do the afternoon drive show called The Flash Drive. And it is an honor to take people home and get people's kids from school from 3 to 7 p.m. all the way through the week, as well as the KFM Top 40 on the weekends. But today I am here as a facilitator to ensure that you get what you need. You know, research is vitally important as to what we do. We did some research in-house, and we found that 1 in 13 KFM 94.5 presenters have mohawks. It's that accurate that we're doing today. And we want to make sure that you get all the stats that you require just to ensure that you know exactly what the landscape looks like. We've been through a tough year last year, but I think it's important for us to innovate together, and this is exactly what we're doing. We're showing you what our innovations are, but more importantly, ensuring that your decisions are informed with some good backing, credible research, impartial research, more importantly, so you can make sure that you get your brand elevated with some incredible radio stations with Primedia Broadcasting. So I just wanted to get back to the poll because we're going to do a lot of polls today. Obviously, it's research, so we have to have that research trend. So I just want to ask the administrator, IT guru, to give me just a little idea. So just reading your results so far, only 10% with none were fine to wait for the new currency. Then 58% leading that is none. We want some data, please. And since you asked so nicely, I think it's only important for me to make sure that you get exactly what you need. And we got the people who will be taking you through this entire run. Now, TGI 6%, 5%, 7%, 40%, we got all of that sorted. But clearly you want some data, and we want to give you some data. So here's the data number, *122. Oh, no, that was airtime data. No, I don't mean that. I actually mean the research they require to make sure that you execute your campaigns in places that you know people who you really need your brands to connect with are there. They have to be there. So we have somebody who has been working tirelessly Sometimes I don't understand how this person sleeps, and I'm just really, really honored to introduce her. She is somebody who makes this her obsession, but at the same time ensures that everything is accurate and everything is, I mean, compelling. Trust me, when you see these statistics, I know it's going to help you, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to help. So without any further ado, and just a quick reminder, there's a Q&A session that we'll have straight after. So if you have any questions as you go through this PowerPoint presentation, then please drop a question in there. It could be from anything about statistics, my hair, I mean, whatever comes to mind. Hoy, we are here for you. It's an open forum and we want to welcome you. So without any further ado, we'd love to introduce you to our resident guru when it comes to research and statistics. Please clap your hands. I'll be able to hear it from Cape Town, South Africa. Don't worry. It's Melissa McNally. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Carl. And hi to everyone. And thank you for joining us for the first Audioscope webinar. We hope that you're going to find the information interesting and informative today that we're going to actually present to you. At Primedia Broadcasting, as Carl said, we've made it an obsession to continuously strive to be in touch with our audiences and their needs through conducting consistent research using our internal panel called Prime Connect. For those of you who aren't familiar with Prime Connect, it is a radio listener panel with a capacity for over 10,000 listeners across our radio stations and competitor radio stations to allow us to have a view of how our consumers are performing against the actual landscape. When we look at the actual sample of Prime Connect, over here you can see that we are sampling across other radio stations, and this is specifically emphasized in the Western Cape and Gauteng. Further to that, if we move on to the next slide, you can see that we have age distributions and race and gender distributions further to that SEM that are representative of the actual regions that we function within. The data that we're going to present to you today for Audioscope specifically is weighted across to gender as well as race specific data. So what we really found during COVID, we noticed that many of our listeners were shifting their behavior consistently, and not just their listening behavior, but also their behavior in categories. So we continued doing a lot of research for our clients as well as for ourselves, which also resulted in our research team developing a tracker to understand audio behavior. And thus we see that Audioscope was born in October and it was rolled from October to December in terms of the data that you're about to see, with a total sample of just under 2,790 respondents. So the data that we're going to look at today specifically within this presentation is Audioscope, as well as lockdown specific data. We've been tracking trends since level 5 because we saw significant shifts in terms of listening behavior through the various lockdown level phases, which I think is really important for planners and strategists right now. But we're also cognizant of the fact that media agencies and advertisers have been under more and more pressure to make the right decisions when it comes to selecting effective media types. So providing data has become more important to understand our consumer journeys. Ebiquity recently released a study called Reevaluating Media for Recovery, which examines key campaign metrics that will deliver brand growth during a recession, according to agency and advertisers. In the study, the key attributes were identified as brand saliency, targeting the right people in the right place at the right time, triggering a positive emotional response and increasing campaign ROI, as well as maximizing campaign reach. However, when the actual audit occurred, they did evidence-based audits, and we can see that radio delivered against the most important criteria for successfully navigating a recession. However, perceptually, we saw that advertisers and brand owners in that space, as well as agencies, were actually stating that digital was perceived to perform better. But the main takeout is that radio actually indexed second to TV, and traditional mediums performed well in this space. Another interesting reality in 2020 is how audio became more relevant, with many brands such as Shell and Coca-Cola turning to audio-specific strategies. Globally, Bauer Media saw an increase in smart speaker usage during lockdown. Further to this, radio listeners on our panel mentioned that they increased their radio listening, as well as their podcast and streaming usage, which is similar to other third-party data and research that we've seen over the past couple of months. In line with the global findings, our listeners also indicated that they were tuning in for their usual shows. Global research indicated that presenter relationships with listeners had increased in importance, as humans look for meaningful connections during this period. Our radio listeners turned to radio to create a sense of connection and community during lockdown, as their levels of anxiety and depression increased, many claiming that radio created a sense of normalcy during this time. So we saw many people actually utilizing radio to relax and remain entertained through the various lockdown phases. Over and above that, I know that many of you have asked us, is radio still reaching people during this time? We've seen shifts in behavior. Are people still listening? So from Audioscope, we can see that we are still achieving that reach within Gauteng and the Western Cape specifically. Over and above that, during lockdown, like I said, we trended the data and we could see shifts. So during level 5, for instance, listening behavior shifted out by an hour in the morning specifically. So we had people tuning in slightly later across the radio landscape. Over and above that, we saw it starting to normalize by level 2, but the seasonality that occurred during level 1, so school holidays, etc., started to impact when people were tuning in again. But it doesn't mean that we lost listeners at this point. It really means that people started changing their mediums. So as more people started to work from home, we started to see at-home listening increasing as well. In car as well as at work or in office listening being very similar across both regions in terms of the actual rankings. Further to this, if we look at the devices that they utilized, in-car listening looks like it would be high as car radio is being utilized most frequently. But if we actually roll up the scores for cell phone radio apps, as well as actual cell phone excluding app, we can see that that is higher. So this speaks to the fact that people have adapted their listening behavior during lockdown. What we did find quite interesting was TV becoming more prevalent during this period of time. So where we had regionality for stations, we're seeing that, well, regionality is not such a big thing in terms of the broadcasting patterns here, but rather that people are going to be picking up on a national level for a regional station. So it breaks down those barriers that we inherently thought were there initially. But we've also tracked this during lockdown, and just to speak to the point that we saw this changing over the various levels, and mobile usage again up during level 1, as well as TV. So it spoke to the fact that when people were going away, we always thought maybe they'd drop off or switch to another station, but it's really speaking to the fact that they're using different devices. Although this holiday period was slightly different with many people staying at home. So we did see this TV up over here as well. So it's speaking to audio strategies that probably need to move into the TV space as well. Further to this, app usage is gaining traction, as is podcasting, with more than 1/3 of our listeners indicating that they use radio apps, and a significant amount of these individuals have listened to podcasts. Those who listen to podcasts have listened to content produced by local radio stations and presenters, and are most likely to indicate a need for local content at this point. If we look at this podcasting, it is gaining traction from when we've looked at previous studies from Edison. With the Infinite Dial study, we're starting to see an increase in this space now, and it is gaining traction as we produce more local content. But back onto content, in the Audioscope research, we found that the main drivers to content amongst the Western Cape and Gauteng were similar, with slight variations being noted in ranking, with weather, news, music, and traffic all playing an important role. What we have seen across both regions is an emergence of an interest in community news, which has been gaining traction over time. And that speaks to that community element and this community theme that we've seen around radio over this entire lockdown period that has become more and more important, with many people saying, I'm anxious at night, I tune into the radio to make me feel more like I'm a part of something. So community starting to feature more over time. However, we've also been tracking topics around COVID and what people would like to hear during lockdown. And it's really focused around financial and mental health and wellness topics. And this really has dominated throughout the various levels. And we've seen mental health and wellness gaining more and more traction in this space, with many of our stations actually adapting their content to appeal to these needs of the listeners. But as we mentioned earlier, we're also interested in tracking against our competitors and understanding what's happening in this landscape. We have weighted our data according to the general population within those regions. And what you can see here is how 947 and Metro FM compete consistently across the key metrics. And this is not unusual for us to see, and this is not unusual or different from what we've seen in our own external research for our market studies as well. It really is in line with all the patterns we'd expect to see. KFM also performing well on all these key metrics, fighting for space and share of ear with Heart, Good Hope, and Umhlobo Wenene. But we have also noticed an interesting spike in listening on Fridays, which I think was interesting. And this speaks to how our behavior is also changing right now. And we can see that many people with the work from home situation are using radio to gear themselves up for the weekend. So really presenting a new opportunity in this space. When we examine time of day for Gauteng, this is in line with other types of data that we've seen before. We note that Monday to Friday, we see the normal peaks being your 6 to 9 and your afternoon peak as well. And just to go back, also looking at the weekends, I think what's quite noticeable there is that 9 to 12 peak that we're starting to see and 12 to 3. So presenting different opportunities, but things to think about when we actually start planning for campaigns. Over and above that, if we look at the Western Cape specifically, this curve, you can see the weekend curve follows a similar Monday to Friday curve, which I thought was quite interesting as well. But also noting that we see traction from 6 to 9 also on the weekend. So that's something to consider, how both the regions are quite different in terms of their listening behavior and patterns that we start to see. But understanding our audiences is key to our business as well as to our clients. And really utilizing Prime Connect, we get to delve into categories for our clients, understand the headspace of our listeners, and augment our Audioscope type data with psychographics and headspace information. What I do want to emphasize is with Prime Connect is this is a value-added service to all of our clients. It has no cost associated with it. And by utilizing this, we're able to assist you in crafting the right kind of campaigns for the actual target markets you're looking at. We're able to give you headspace information because right now we've seen data shifting time and time again, each week, each month, with the various lockdown levels and the different headspace that people are in. But just to dig a little bit deeper into our station. So now we're going to go a little bit more granular in terms of our stations. And we're not just looking at everything from an overall type level, from an audio overall level. But what you can see here is from a 947 perspective in particular, we can see that we have quite consistent listening throughout the week and the general drop-off that we'd expect to see over a weekend. You can also see the patterns are in line with what we'd expect. So the people are listening during the peak times that we'd expect them to be doing so. And we see this interesting peak on the weekends where we can actually utilize and leverage that for brands. Over and above that, our listeners tend to consider themselves to be creative trendsetters, the 947 listeners. They're responsible for the purchases in their household, and they're more likely to be watch DSTV on the weekend and watch some Netflix and stream radio as well. But they have varied levels of wealth, reported wealth, and this is a reported measure, where they consider themselves to be middle class and upper middle class. They do tend to spend their time on weekends at the mall, which I was quite surprised to see as well. And they're more likely to do so than the competitor radio sets. And having a look at their shopping, they're more likely to shop on a Saturday as well. So that's the kind of information and granularity we can start digging out for you by station, by category as well. So if you had a specific category, it's just to give you an example as well. Having a look at 702 specifically, what was interesting for us is we are measuring TSL. I didn't mention this earlier, or time spent listening. Right now, we're not going to put it in on a total level because of the fact that we are looking for trendability. But notably, Gauteng was slightly lower in terms of actual hours spent listening during a week than the Western Cape. So speaking to maybe shorter bursts of TSL. So we might need to consider that going forward. When we do look at 702, for instance, their TSL was looking quite healthy. And we do see people coming in quite highly every day of the week, a little bit of a drop off on a Thursday going into a Friday, but still quite high. And with the music offering that 702 has on a weekend, we still have quite a significant amount of people coming in for that, but very often a different listener coming into the weekend than you'd have during the week. So that's quite interesting to note from a psychographic perspective and content perspective. Over and above that, we see that 702 has a very healthy peak in the mornings, going into afternoons. And then looking at the weekends, we see with talk, people tend to start a little bit earlier in the day as well. So slightly different. And for those of you who haven't received our information, we've recently put together some insights on 702. I think you'll find it quite interesting right now, looking at the repositioning and how we are performing on key metrics there, with really positive feedback from our listeners, and a lot of the database being comprised of P2s, or people who don't always listen to 702, but they do come in and it is part of their repertoire. So I thought that was really important to note at this point. And that information is available on our website. So having a look at how they classify themselves, they see themselves as non-conformist intellectual thinkers, many of them being responsible for their household purchases, a large podcasting base in the talk space, which is interesting to note as well. And it makes sense with the type of format. They have varying levels of wealth. So a lot of the time, we've only considered a 702 audience member to be wealthy or exceptionally affluent, but we do see them being varied, but they do have that disposable income as well when we get to the top end of the market within here. Over and above that, from a shopping perspective, they are slightly more traditional with brick and mortar, but they're also using a combination of e-commerce in this space, with quality being a primary driver to them when they look at specific categories and brand choice. Going into KFM specifically, we can see here a little bit lighter in terms of the radio listening, but generally speaking, listening throughout the week, a little bit of a drop off onto the weekends that we'd expect to see. But here you can see coming in early in the mornings during the week and coming back in the afternoons. But then again, looking at that trend that is quite consistent with the actual regional trend, we can see this occurring from 9 to 12, 12 to 3 on a weekend. So really important to note that. And yeah, Carl's also available on the weekend and actually in this time band right here. So having a look at their actual mindset, we can see they are conservative traditionalists in terms of how they see themselves, with a slight flair for being more creative. Interestingly, they also consider themselves to be jokers, more so than our other radio stations. Slightly less likely than the other stations to be responsible for the purchases in their household, but still quite high. And on a weekend, they're generally more likely to actually exercise. They have a widespread in terms of wealth. However, you're going to see them clustering more around working class perceptually, as well as the middle class. And this tends to be because they are our younger audiences moving through our SEM structure as well. And they are likely, this group of individuals, they are more likely to switch their brand if there is a specific special on as well. And majority of them actually shopping on a weekend as well. Over and above that, if we look at Cape Talk, which I think is always an interesting one to look at, and it has slightly different peaks and troughs from what we're used to seeing in the other data, but you can see quite a high listener base coming in at the beginning of the week. And then over and above that, if we have a look here, many of these listeners, you can see are coming in into the afternoon show. So they're listening throughout the day, but this interesting peak that we see here for John Mathan's show specifically. And this continues into the evening. If we start looking at it and breaking up the data even further, we do see high evening listening from these types of listeners. And bearing in mind, this particular station has a massive digital footprint. So I think it's interesting to note that we are seeing streaming being taken up into our stations as well. And this data has started to normalize at a much higher level than pre-COVID levels. Over and above that, if we look at Saturday to Sunday, you can see a very different trend to what we were seeing with our other stations. From a headspace perspective, we can see that conservative intellectuals, in terms of how they perceive themselves, they're responsible for purchases in their households, and they tend to want to read a book on the weekend, but they are going to watch Netflix as well. Further to this, they are considered to be more slightly wealthier than the other groups, and they consider themselves to be so. So that correlates with our information that we have and triangulates with all the data points that we have. They also tend to be more loyal to brands. So that was an interesting takeout compared to when we looked at the other stations. And they shop more on a weekend. Saturdays being more prevalent for most of our brands. So from a key insights perspective, where are we? What can we wrap up on here? But really, it's radio is still being listened to. I think that's the big question that we've had throughout lockdown. Listeners are still listening to the radio. They've just changed where, possibly if they're working from home, and how, by utilizing a different device. And they listen to the radio, and they've adapted to the changes brought about by COVID. Radio streaming has increased in importance, and one of the unintended consequences of the pandemic is how millions of us ended up at home. I mean, I'm presenting here from home today, and in the process, that meant a greater dependence on station streams via a number of devices. So we saw that with the TV listening and the mobile usage, etc. And I think that'll be quite interesting to see with the new currency. And listeners still tune in for their normal shows, and due to the need for human connection, listeners are still tuning in for their normal radio shows, and global findings demonstrate that there is an even greater need for listeners to depend on radio personalities. And finally, I think it's really news has increased in importance. If I look at where our data was at the beginning of this, many people were making appointment listening types of sessions to come in for news specifically, and they were coming in for the news and getting COVID updates. Now people need trustworthy news, and it's really important for them to help navigate an ever-changing landscape. So thank you so much for your time, everybody, today. I see there have been several questions, and I hope Deborah's been fielding them in the background, and I'm sure we're going to answer more of them now. But we are gearing up for the next Audioscope, which will be available probably in about April. And we can have that chat then about the new results and look at some of the trendability of the data. Thank you so much for your time. This actual presentation is going to be made available on our website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Melissa. You're amazing. If you just stepped in, you're a bit late, but I never judge. Welcome to our first wave Audioscope. My name is Wastie from KFM 94.5. It's an honor to be a facilitator of a lot of questions that have come out. I know that Deborah, Melissa, while you were talking, Deborah was answering every single question in the chat box. But I think that just for the sake of us bringing it to the fore, I think it's quite important for us to do a few of those. Before we get there, I'm in the mood for another poll. It's a very, very important poll, and it'll pop up on your screen shortly. It'll take you a couple of seconds to pick something, but I'd like my IT professional to pull it up. It's if you could choose a narrator for your life story, who would it be? We've got David Attenborough there, Nathaniel, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Please vote now, and we'll get to those results in the next couple of moments. Then Melissa will then analyze said results on a psychological level, therefore showing you a bit more about your motivational structures within your life. Please vote. We'll give you a couple of seconds, and then we'll get some results for you in the next couple of moments. Also, keep those questions coming. We'd love to answer them just so we are all in the know. And I know, Deborah, you've been answering every single one, but I'd love this to be something that is on our stage, so to speak, so you can hear exactly what's been up in that little section over there. So there we go. Let's go. Poll is in already. IT people are so fast in this building. Wow. If you could choose a narrator for your life story, who would it be? 17% for Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know. It's probably the whole thing where it's all like, we've got to get out of here. No, we have to go back, get to the job. But I understand. It's fine if you would be that one. And then Nathaniel, 28%. I'm a bit disappointed. That's the only South African in the poll. I won't judge, though. What I will say is, Nathaniel is baie lekker mens. Hy kan lekker jou life story vertel. Maar hy's 'n bietjie eccentric. Daai's my groot woord vir die oggend. And then also you got David Attenborough, 55%. And I mean, I don't blame you. I watched that Netflix documentary of his, and he was absolutely amazing. As a natural researcher goes and ensures that you get the right data to spend on radio. We'll now go back to questioning with Melissa and Deborah. Thanks for voting. That was so lekker. Now, let's go into a few of those questions. I know there are a lot of them. You've been coming through thick and fast. I can just tell you that, Melissa, just anecdotally, I know when you mentioned things about radio, I was very surprised about the craziness of KFM 94.5. I have no idea where that comes from. Anyway, right. So what we do need is a few questions. I want to go to the first one here. And the first one is, and I think this is for you, Melissa. I see from your presentation that TV followed by radio lead in performance. What does that mean, given what we have been told that non-traditional media is overtaking traditional media? Does this have to do with the type of content they are looking for from various media? Example, radio for information, news, current affairs, COVID updates versus tuning into the likes of Netflix for escapism. What are your thoughts?
Cool. Thank you so much. So I think the thing is, when we look at radio, it creates a sense of connection that we probably wouldn't have from other mediums as well. So digital has its place in the funnel, as does radio. But radio, we see, really performs well, and so do the traditional mediums in terms of those key metrics that we saw, in terms of creating recessionary-proof brands. And that's really what we need to focus on. How are we going to get through this difficult period? And what are the mediums that are going to guide us and navigate us through this? And radio performs really well alongside TV there.
Yeah, as a radio presenter, I can completely say that a lot of the content is based on TV watching, because people have watched TV so often during the lockdown. One particular example is Bridgerton, episode 5. But I don't want to go in there now because it's the morning. I do have another question for you, and that is Metro and 947 formats are largely different. Why is there such crossover of listenership? This is from Simon Parkinson.
That's a good question. We do actually see quite a lot of crossover in the audiences, as well as we also see crossover with 702 and Metro listeners for the actual format on weekends. So it really is about people changing their tastes, also people wanting sharing tastes across different platforms. And what we have seen in terms of the actual amount of stations that people listen to, you're not necessarily going to be sticking to one. You're going to have an average of about 2 and 8-bit stations in Gauteng. So that speaks to the fact that there are audiences across different platforms.
Just a quick one on that same point, because when you saw the statistics, you saw Metro all the way up there. Essentially, one thinks this is a Prime Connect study. What does that do to the results for Prime Media Broadcasting if Metro is all the way up there?
I think it just makes it more fair and unbiased, and it also allows us to see how we actually comparing and faring in Gauteng or the Western Cape. I have seen questions about KZN. We do have some sample in there, but it's not the primary focus for this study. But it really allows us to get a general view of the state of radio for us. And I'd like to think I'm trying to be platform agnostic and station agnostic most of the time in order to allow our clients to have the best and most useful information so they can make empowered and informed decisions going forward. So that's really where I want to be, is slightly more impartial in the space.
Thank you so much
just
for answering.
add to that.
Oh, no problem, Deborah.
I think it's important for us as Prime Media to not just rabbit hole down our own stations and try and understand everything about that. We keep our eye on competitors all the time. And I mean, the data that we've shown you today isn't just for advertisers. It's used to improve the station product. We run continuous surveys on perceptions and associations on the stations as well as performance. So we have to look at what everybody else is doing as well as what we're doing. And we've had a couple of questions about the ubiquity slide that Melissa showed right up front.
Yes.
I mean, it's also really important for us as a radio media owner or an audio media owner, I suppose is more correct, to understand what's happening with broader media consumption. So that, I mean, that is why we have a look at what's happening with TV, and we under no illusions that radio, audio are the only channels that have been consumed. What was heartening in the ubiquity data, and for those of you that are familiar with the study, it set out to look at the perceptions versus the evidence, the perceptions around which media worked on the attributes that were important to advertisers, and then what the evidence said. And digital media, and this question was in the chat as well, digital media is generally overrated. So we think, or advertisers think, that it performs better than it actually does. And what was really exciting in the latest wave of the ubiquity research, which was done under COVID conditions, is that we've actually seen 19% of advertisers planning to invest more in radio in 2021 versus pre the COVID 2020 budgets. It's the highest key shift for any traditional medium. And that's showing that the perceptions as well as the evidence are catching up for radio. So it's performing better and better. Again, we're not saying we're the best performing medium in the world, but we look at our performance relative to other media, and very heartening results from the context of all media consumption and buying patterns.
That's good news for me. Thanks, Deborah. Job retention. Here's your next question. This comes from Richard Lord. What is the TV device that people are using to listen? Is it their DSTV decoder, or is there another device such as an Android box or Apple TV device? Can you get any of that data through?
We'd actually have to investigate that further, because as we've seen the TV trend increasing, I realize it's probably a space we need to dig into a little bit deeper. And I think we've also seen over 2020 how audio became so visual. And we've seen a lot of radio personalities now almost being quite visual, and we've seen stations becoming visual. So it's really important for us to dig into that a bit deeper. So yes, we'll have to unpack that for you, Richard. It is something we need to do over time.
Your next question is lower TSL in GP on 702 versus WC Western Cape. Of course, can we say that's due to less choice of stations in the Western Cape?
We'd be hypothesizing really at that point. So I wouldn't be able to take a stab at it, but it may be one of the factors.
Chris Botha sent something through, and this is, I enjoyed the highlight of community news. What do you consider community news as, and is there a station plan to build on this?
So I'd probably have to ask Deborah that question, because she is our strategy officer, so she'd be able to provide more insights into that. But there certainly is a need for community news, and we've seen it coming up in focus groups as well. When I talk to people, there's this need for people to get into community, understand what's happening around that immediate need, as well as when we do these lockdown surveys. So it's been quite an interesting theme that we've seen, but it's also a global theme. So Deb, what is the plan?
So there is a plan. I can see we've got station managers on the attendee list. I'm not going to put them on the spot here, but I mean, that community is, and Chris, I responded on the chat, it's such a key strength of radio, and regional radio in particular. We saw that. It was one of the things that all of our research, or all of our data was telling us as lockdown started. There was such an overwhelming need for people to connect with what was going on in their own little worlds, and to kind of alleviate the loneliness and the anxiety that they were feeling because of the pandemic. So it's absolutely a key strength. I mean, just an example from 702, we have a town hall strategy where we go into different communities and engage kind of on a one-to-one basis, so on a micro level with a couple of hundred people, and then take those views and those opinions back onto the station. So it's absolutely key. There are a number of strategies around increasing the accessibility of communities to our stations to try and give that feedback and give that relevant information.
Thank you, ladies. Another question coming through. Globally, there's been a significant emphasis on trust as a core media platform offering. Do you have plans to build a trust ranking for your stations?
I know this is a Gordon Miller question because it's the hardest question that we've got, which is what we'd expected.
That's correct. It's Gordon Miller.
It's Gordon Miller. So yep. I think it's the short answer, Gordon, is we hadn't thought of it. Thank you. We thought of it now, and we're gonna have a look into it. It is a really good idea, because trust is also, it's such a key benefit of radio. The halo of the trust that people have, and the relationship they've built up with the brand and with, very trustworthy looking presenters like Carl Wastie. But that kind of ongoing daily rapport that they feel that they have, and again, the connection. So radio delivers trust, and there's evidence that shows that trust halos onto your advertising. So it's a really good idea. And I think, Gordon, you also said it's something that RAMS really needs to have in it later in the chat. These are great ideas. They absolutely are.
No, it's really important. We are measuring it. We do have other studies, our listen surveys. They're done once a year. We conduct them once a year. They get relatively large samples. It's mainly with a P1 audience, though. And from there, we ask them trust towards specific mediums, including radio in there. That's as far as we've gone. But I agree with you. We do need to look at unpacking trust, firstly in the category as a whole, and then finding the metrics for it on that level.
Just to mention RAMs for a second, this is just to sidestep trust just for a moment. Are you expecting RAMs to come about anytime soon? Are we starting to look at this being a platform for something completely new when it comes to radio research? Or is there a RAMs return on the horizon?
Oh, Rams is definitely, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's returning. It just had a little bit of a break. We've currently just signed off the new currency. So we're expecting results this year for the new currency. So do not fear, currency is coming back, everybody. So we will have that to trade on. And it is going to be very exciting.
Fantastic. Another question coming through. This from Simon Parkinson. Are you seeing crossover between 947 and Kaya as well?
If we look at some of our other data, there's not always massive crossover between 947 and Kaya, but more crossover that you may experience from a 947 metro perspective.
Another question coming through from Tracy. Tracy says, since there's a higher incidence of streaming, is there evidence of regional crossovers? Example, Gauteng is listening to Western Cape stations and vice versa. Example, Tracy says that she's a Gautenger, but streams in Magic 828.
So we've certainly seen some of this anecdotally more in my open-ended type of data, where people have indicated that I live in Gauteng, but I listen to KFM. So we do see that on occasion actually happening, or somebody who may live in Cape Town and they listen to Cape Talk as well as 702. So we do see that actually occurring.
And I can definitely say that because there are individuals entering competitions in Cape Town that are from Durban and Johannesburg and other areas too. And you can see that quite significantly. Onto another question from the chat section. Are you able to measure listening through apps like TuneIn Radio app and others? Is there any data for that?
Richard, we do get the data, not as frequently as we would like. And I think that's an important question if I'm understanding the direction you're going in. So we've seen radio listening has remained constant, and what's changed has been the device. And we saw people's patterns kind of get disrupted and then start settling back into some kind of routine. They were just then streaming instead of perhaps listening via a car radio. Our philosophy is really to make our stations available as broadly as possible so that there's no barrier to the listener experience. So if you happen to like TuneIn, or if you happen to like any other radio app, I mean, we've got chart shows on Spotify, we've got our podcasts on Spotify, wherever it is that you're most comfortable as an access point, we would deliver that audience. And I think in future we'll see more fragmentation around that. At the moment, we do still see a concentration of listenership on our own owned apps, our Primedia station apps.
And then another question coming through. This is from Eugene. And Eugene, I'm loving this question. It says, given the blending between different media types, would you consider adding a visual element to audio? Example here was cameras in studio. I like this question a lot. I almost want to answer it, but ladies, please do.
Oh no, Carl, it's actually for you. I feel like it's the right one for you.
Because you're on video right at this moment, Carl.
Yes. No, but I do believe that given the fact that I feel that we build cultures of media consumption in us. And I know 2020 provided us with a culture of actually going to the TV at night and getting the normality and even a bit of escapism from there. I suppose radio was something, and this is not backed by research. So I know Melissa and Deborah, you're going to say, don't do the one person research call. I'm sorry about this. But what I've heard is that there was a certain, I get up in the morning with the morning show, so I can do my work, which is not at work anymore. It's now on my kitchen table. And then when I need to wrap up, I need to hear your voice call because you are the afternoon guy. Then I know I need to wrap up. So there was something about the ebb and flow of life and the normalcy that people enjoyed about radio, but then they'd sort of switch off and go to TV and enjoy that. And what I thought as a broadcaster is that it's quite important for me to have a visual element to my content so that, you know, if I'm going to do something that you've seen on TikTok, if I'm going to discuss something on air, I'm going to have to back it with some visual stimulus, because then you're going to need to know that this place that you consider normal, like radio, it has to be more tangible. And as a radio presenter, I need to be more tangible. I can't just be the voice on your radio. Welcome and good morning for KFM 94.5. I have to be a real person as well. And people let's be honest, they also would like to see that you're struggling along with them and involved in the lifestyle. And that's very important to me. And the only way I can show you that, I can describe through storytelling using this beautiful thing called a microphone. But what I do need to do is I need to be visual, and I need to say, hey, this is what's happening. And that's why you'll see with many of our stations that you'll get so much. Just check our Facebook pages. Across the board, we're trying our best to create somewhat of a TV mindset to our visual stimulus, while still making sure that we have that purity of radio that brings you credible information and great infotainment that you can trust every single day. So to that question, I know that my boss knocks on the door and says, we need to see more, we need to see more, we need to see more. And I know the traditionalist radio guy is like, why do I need to be seen? Why? And I get it. I do get it. That's the purity of traditional radio, that, that sort of mystery. But at the moment, I think it's so vitally important to be seen. And this is why it's an obsession to make sure that, you go live as often as you can. You get these beautiful studios, cameras working as often as we can, because it does make a difference. Because people will comment and say, Carl, I saw you wearing the small shorts in the video. Are you wearing it now while you're talking to us? I will not tell you where that video is, but I will say that it is meaningful to actually have a visual element to radio. And that's my answer. How did I do, Melissa and Deborah?
Amazingly well. People are loving.
Incredible. And I mean, I don't know how you do that voice, and we want your hair and makeup artist and stylist. Well done.
Yeah. Just say.
I'll send you to Carl. Yeah, all of those people are my gardener, and I do my own gardening. Anyway. So any more questions? I'm going to check it out. Let's go to Tandiwe. Is radio still the theater of the mind then? Or is that thought of the old? Dun, dun, dun. If only you had a radio person to answer.
It's getting quite hard to read the chat because there's like a lot of fan mail coming through for you.
Come.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your comment. Thank you, Edie, on your compliments for Carl. I think Melissa's research has also been really amazing, just to remind everyone of that. I think Carl's point about the relatability and the kind of the video enhancing the connection to presenters is really important. But theatre of the mind it's always been, in the few years I've been in media, it's always been such a strength of radio that you can connect with the imagination, and people can kind of come up with idea or conjure the visuals in their own head as they listen. Carl, some more compliments coming through. This is from a compliment from your boss has just come through on the chat. I just want to remind everybody, if you want to get the presentation, please, it's on our website. We're going to load it up now. It's primediabroadcasting.co.za, and there's a lot of other information there. We have done a lot of work on relaunching 702, and we've got our first listener sentiment indicators that we've loaded up on that website post the relaunch, which is we're really excited about that.
Just one on Tandiwe's Theatre of the Mind, and you're dead right. That's never going to be lost in radio. There's always going to be that beautiful mystery that we can add in studio when we are talking to people, and there's a little thing. I mean, I can put my colleague Zoe in a stadium just using sound effects, and it sounds so real. So that's the purity I was talking about. And one thing I know about purity and traditionalism is that we need to evolve and add to it as well. While keeping the core of what we are here for and our purpose, it's important to color it in with things that are parallel to the lifestyles of those individuals we are serving as radio broadcasters. So that will never go away. Theatre of the mind is the magic. With regard to any of the other questions that I'm seeing over here, they're coming through thick and fast. And no, they're not all compliments, Deborah. Just letting you know. Let's go. Whilst the research is interesting and does confirm what we knew to be true, I feel we do still need RAMs to do our planning with GRPs and CPPs. I read that. I was like, OMG, WTF, LOL. Sorry, I missed the answer. When can we expect updated RAMs? I believe the contract is out to pitch. So is there actual a date? Can we say after June? Can we get more specific? What do you ladies think?
Yes, so we've been working closely with regards to this process. I mean, it took a long time. There were a couple of us put onto a committee and we oversaw all of this and the whole process. And it was also done with a pitch consultant in conjunction with us. Yeah, so it's been quite a process. We went through a lot of proposals, a lot of time went into it, but we're at a phase now where it's signed off and we're moving forward. There are timelines together, and we are looking at a release of RAMs this year, maybe the second half of the year. So that will be occurring. And I think it's really exciting as well for everybody, because we feel like we haven't had currency for a little bit of time, but we have had other data. And to that point, it has reaffirmed what we knew, and we know what's happening, but it also allows us now going into currency to gear ourselves up to that with that full competitor set that we've been able to monitor.
Great. So we are looking forward to that. If there are no other questions, we could start wrapping up. I can confirm primediabroadcasting.co.za, ladies, to register and get this presentation, as well as follow every bit of information as we get it. I know we love spilling information. That's what we do as broadcasters. So is that correct? primediabroadcasting.co.za. That's the website. Is that correct?
That's it. Thank you, Carl. Please do
That's it.
register. There's lots there.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I would love to send you to the website. And more importantly, I'd love to thank you so much for engaging in the presentation, for answering the questions. And I know that you are here because you still believe in radio. And that is a very, very special thing to me. And believe it, because the whole reason why, if anybody asks me, Carl, you're on TV in the morning and radio in the afternoon, what's your favorite? It'll be radio every single time, because this is the only medium where you get to engage with one person at a time. And that's just the power. And I think that if I'm going to tell one of my friends that I got these sneakers from that brand, the trust between us is so much greater than if I had to say, hey guys, get these new sneakers and follow my page. Don't worry, that's no shade to social media, but radio has its place in the authenticity as well as the credibility in social communication. And that's how we get things across. So one thing marketing people always know, word of mouth is the best. It's even better when it's just you telling somebody that you trust and vice versa, that something is worth getting. I think that's the beautiful thing about radio. If there's anything more from you, Melissa, any closing comments, you, Deborah, please feel free.
Nothing.
I'm just going to ignore. There's so many requests coming through for you to do impersonations and voices.
Oh.
I'm going to ignore those, Carl, and say thank you so much to everybody for joining us for this quite serious research presentation. It was lovely to have you today.
Thank you to everybody for making the time to join us. I know it's a hectic time of the year, and we hope to see you at the next Audioscope presentation. And yes, and to Gordon's point, we're also going to start tracking some trust by then. So that'll be a nice element to add on to this. So great idea. And definitely we're going to dig into TV a little bit more. So there's some cool pointers that we got out of here and areas of interest. So thank you.
Thanks to Melissa and Deborah for your tireless work. We do appreciate you, and thanks a lot to you for chilling, relaxing, and doing your thing. And thanks for engaging with us. primediabroadcasting.co.za. You can get the presentation there. And remember, there is indeed a second wave, but I do have to tell you, this is my final wave, saying goodbye. And thank you very much for joining our presentation. From me, Carl Wastie, I will chat to you when you're in Cape Town or when you're streaming on an app from somewhere else in South Africa, or DSTV channel 880. Is this a plug? Yes, it is. Absolutely.
You know we finally here, right?
Oh, this is why the Friday thing happens with the research, by the way. It's because of this song.
Saturday, Sunday.
Have a lovely day. It's almost weekend.